Hi there, and today we'll learn about Texas constitutional history. We're going to learn about the constitutions of Texas, and really I want to talk about 7 of them in particular. The 1827 Constitution, which is the Mexican Constitution, the Constitution of the Independent Republic of Texas, 36, the 45 Union Constitution, the Civil War Constitution, the 66 Constitution, Transitional Post-Civil War Constitution, the 69 Radical Reconstruction Constitution, and finally our current Post-Reconstruction Constitution. So we'll systematically go through every constitution with the goal of learning and extrapolating lessons on why Texas is Texas. So to understand Texas is to understand that Texas has a reactionary history. In other words, a lot of political changes happen as a reaction of a certain situation that happened. And remember, Texas is conservative and reactionary in nature. Now, a few things to know about Texas. We have a rigid constitution. It means it's difficult to change. It is very voluminous. And we add a lot of things, some that even may be deemed to be legislative law in the Constitution to make it harder for a judge or somebody to change the laws of the state. We have a plural executive, means that we have independent officers of the executive branch running for office, from the lieutenant governor to the attorney general. We have a citizens legislature. It means that instead of having a professionalized legislature that meets every year and is funded well, we have a legislature that is poorly funded, that meets once every 2 years. Most of our judges are elected and are partisan, meaning they run for office and they choose a political party to be part of. And we have 2 high courts, or really 2 Supreme Courts, one dealing with civil matters and the other one dealing with criminal matters. So let's start at the beginning. Coahuila y Texas. Texas is part of Mexico, all right? We are the northern region, and we are connected to a southern province called Coahuila. We have a governor who serves with a small group of 12 members, and they have 4-year terms, okay, 4-year terms. It's a unicameral versus a bicameral, because in this time we're following Spanish civil law procedures. Now, I'm not going to get into too much of that. Just understand that English colonial legacy was called common law, right? So that was a different way of doing law and government, while when you take the Portuguese, when you take the Spanish, their systems were different, or they are regarded as civil law institutions. And so we have these 2 differing systems, right? So Mexico, Spanish, American history, English, right? So in this case, Catholic is a dominant religion. In this case, as I said, instead of having a House of Lords and a House of Commons, or the Senate and a House of Representatives, it's one chamber, right? A couple of things is that Texas has curtailed and banned slavery in most of Mexico. And this came with the 2nd president of Mexico, who was General Guerrero, right? He was Afro-Mezzo. He was mixed Mezzo with Afro, and therefore he pushed towards the banning of slavery. So these are the conditions of Mexico and the Constitution of Coahuila y Texas, right? And so at this point, this is where the Texians are going to come to, this territory. So it's civil law, not common law. He's Spanish, Hispanic, not Anglo-English. Morally, they had abolished slavery in 1829. It's Catholic versus Protestant, right? And those are a few things I'm pointing out to understand the headway that will come when the Texians come into this territory. So this is 1827. Now, Steve Austin wants to be issued an impresario. He wants to be issued a government decree to be allowed to settle into this territory. He needed at least 300 families to band together to agree to come and set up homesteads, of which he was afforded. And so he comes, this soil is good for cotton. And so as this first group of Texians come to this territory with Steve Austin, they also bring in another group of people who did not come by choice, and that is the African American community that was held in human trafficking conditions. So they're trafficked into this area and held in slavery. And a couple of things is, it's important to understand that the land in Mexico or northern Mexico is way cheaper than the land in the current United States at the time. So negotiations happen April 6th, 1830. Now, as this happens, more and more Americans come into Mexico because the land is cheap. The land can support certain things like agrarian cotton, right? And so there's an increase in migration. And the Mexican government actually wanted to curtail this immigration. And there may be various reasons to this. Number one, a lot of the immigrants are of course, American influenced rather than Mexican influenced, right? Language differences. It's very interesting when you think about the current status of immigration in America, south of the border. And so these Anglo-American immigrants are coming in, and Texas wants to limit them because they're also spreading slavery with them, okay? So these are some of those challenges that are happening. Another thing that happens is there's a hero, a military hero, who also comes into Texas, and this is Sam Houston. Sam Houston had been had fought and appointed by Andrew Jackson, the president, to fight First Nations, the Comanche at the Red River, and he also crosses over from the Red River into this territory of Texas. Steve Austin grants him land, and he also comes and settles and becomes part of Texas. At a time where America was expanding, and therefore there are grievances that begin to arise, right? Clearly you can tell culturally, Mexico, the Tejanos, their culture may be different than the Anglo-Americans who are now settling in northern Mexico. And so as these grievances arise, paramount upon them is what I said. Mexico doesn't want slavery or expansion of slavery. The Americans who are coming in from southern states, coming into northern Mexico, they want to expand slavery. So that's one grievance of human trafficking. We have increased rights for immigrants. The Texians who are coming in, by Texians we're talking about the Anglo-Americans coming in from the south, they want greater protections for immigrants than what they had. They actually want to also separate. They want Tejas to be its own territory, split from Calhuia in the south with its own government, somewhat of the way maybe parts of Canada are. Maybe Quebec runs its own government in a different way than another place. So they want greater protections, they want greater separation and autonomy of the area. However, south when you go far south in Mexico, almost center of Mexico, is Mexico City, which is their seat of government. They don't see things this way. And so General Santa Anna does not agree, doesn't want to split and give these Texians more autonomy within Mexico, right? And so a lot of challenges begin to happen. One of them is Austin is thrown in prison for 8 months on the argument that he is causing chaos and rebellion. And so in suspicion of inciting insurrection, right? And so the Spanish-Mexican legacy versus the Anglo-British American legacy are not working together in this territory, and this would lead to now conflict. Mexican troops go to Gonzales in 1835 to recover their cannons. The Mexican government had given cannons to the Texans to defend themselves from Native American they had given them cannons to protect themselves. The Mexican government had given the Texans cannons to protect themselves from attacks by First Nations, right? And so in this regard, they're going back to recover their own cannons. But the Texians fire the cannons upon the Mexicans, and really the battle and the war begins. And Sam Houston will end up becoming the general commander of the Texian military. So March 2nd, 1836, the Republic of Texas's Constitution is enacted. The Declaration of Independence of Texas is done. Now, a couple of things is the Alamo and Goliad. The Alamo, of course, is most famous about the conflict, but in reality, General Santa Anna marched with his troops, 4,000 of them, and it took no more than 90 minutes to completely kill all the 132 Texians, right? So they completely marched through Alamo. They marched through Goliad, where there was also another massacre, right? And at this point, General Santa Anna and 4,000 troops have been marching eastward, basically chasing the Texians out of Texas. They have a superior army. They are more well-equipped. And so, for the most part, the Texians and Sam Houston are running east to try and run back into the United States of America. So, something happened at San Jacinto, right? So, for some unknown reason, General Santa Anna stops and pauses the forward aggression and push of the Texians, right? And so, here at San Jacinto, Houston, April 21st, 1836, at 3:30 p.m., decides we are going to hit the Mexican military with a surprise attack, right? An unknown surprise attack. And believe it or not, they did attack and sent in a surprise attack, and the Mexican army began to fall back to a marshy lake called Peggy Lake, right? And so they're falling back, and they realize they're about to lose this particular battle. Well, something major happened in this battle. They captured General Santa Anna, and they brought him to Sam Houston. So instead of sacrificing himself, General Santa Anna actually signed over Tejas to the Texians, right? And this was a major uproar even in Mexico City, because he could have waited and more troops would have come from the south to support them. And so that is how Texas becomes Texas. A surprise attack on a particular day on a superior military led to a general who was leading Mexico signing over the territory in order to save his own neck. Of course, Sam Houston, being the commander-in-chief of this war, becomes the first president of the Republic of Texas, and Austin would be the Secretary of State. Of course, this leads us now to an independent country called the Republic of Texas, the 1836 Constitution. A couple of things are very clear in the changes that happened. Now, note that under the Mexican government, it was 4-year governor, all right? Now, with the Republic of Texas, we now go down to a U.S. model. So we move from a unicameral to a bicameral. That means 2 branches of the legislative branch. We move from a 4-year governor through to a 3-year president. Okay? And so all these changes happen. Number 2, on the question of slavery, well, that's one of the things that they wanted. And so slavery is enacted. First Nations, Native Americans, and African Americans cannot live freely in the Republic of Texas without permission from the legislative branch. And so the other thing is the president of Texas could not succeed himself. Served 1 term and had to leave office, could not succeed themselves. The church ministers, remember Catholicism was a major part of the government and how things were ran. Church ministers are banned from holding office. And so many changes are happening in Texas as we see they're moving towards a smaller conservative government, right? So when we talk about the conservative government and reactionary politics of Texas, we have to go back to the very founding of the nation with a movement of really trying to limit government institutions and people who hold public office and leave most of the power in the hands of their people and their local governments. So this begins at the very beginning. So we move from a Spanish model of government to a US model of government. All right, and just a few things as mentioned. All presidents subsequent to the first president of Texas will serve 3-year terms and will not be eligible to succeed themselves. Number 2, the legislative branch will be small and they will serve 3-year terms. Okay. And as we've said, all slaves will remain under servitude conditions. All right. So that is Texas. Now, something happens later. So that's 1836. Coming in from, well, this is 1836, coming from 27. Right? So that's the first major change we see in Texas. Texas becomes the Lone Star State, becomes its own independent government. And then in 45, it becomes the 28th state of America. Now, this is the 45 Union Constitution. A couple of things led to Texas becoming part of the United States. Number one, of course, the Texans would have preferred to be part of America. They share the same culture, same political history, same English colonial legacy. Number two, it will give them greater protections from enemies and other foreign nations. So, originally, America didn't want Texas to be part of America because America did not want a further expansion of slavery. So slavery was a major thing that was trying to be blocked. Number two, America did not want to get into war with Mexico, in that this territory was still being disputed by the Mexican authorities. Right? And so America knew going and just bringing in America might trigger a war. Third, Britain saw from losing America and losing some conflicts with America, wanted to find a way to vex or recover parts of America. And therefore, there was discussions of Mexico being in alliance with Britain, that Mexico would accept Texas as its own independent republic, and there would be an alliance, a British, Texas, Mexican alliance, which will have become territorially a security concern for the United States. So all these things, of course, trigger the United States government to know, hey, it is time, we need to annex Texas, we need to bring it in the fold to avoid British aggression, to avoid future conflicts that might arise irrespective of the challenge that might come with Mexico, right? So eventually, this is brought to the U.S. Congress, February 28th, 1845. It is passed. U.S. Congress passes the annexation of Texas. It's brought into to Texas. President Anson Jones of Texas calls a special convention to accept U.S. annexation or remain independent, recognized by Mexico. This is put to vote, and the Texas government accepts to be annexed by the United States. And this is the final act of this great drama, and the Republic of Texas is no more, as the last president of Texas, Anson Jones, says, and hands power to Governor James Pinckney Henderson, who would be the first governor of Texas. And so with the Union Constitution, we see Texas again now becoming part of America. Right? It's now a state. It's no longer a country. Right? It continues to follow the U.S. model. Now, there's greater reduction and checks on government beyond even the 36th Constitution. The reduction of executive powers. Again, America had to accept slavery as part of the acceptance of Texas. Now, in passing, there is somebody I wanted to highlight, kind of like how we could highlight George Washington's contributions to the United States of America. And that is Sam Houston. Sam Houston, of course, had served as the first president of Texas. He becomes a U.S. Senator, right, 1845, and he's a Unionist. He doesn't want to separate, like remember what would happen later on, so he really supports the Union. He becomes a senator from 1845, 46, all the way to 59. He refuted the Kansas-Nebraska Act, which will have expanded slavery into new territories of the United States of America, which made him very unpopular in the South. So he did stop the further expansion of slavery. He becomes governor in 1860, around the time when the Civil War begins. Of course, as a Unionist, he doesn't want Texas to break away, making him even further unpopular among the people. And so he fought against secession, and he was ousted actually from governorship. But that's an interesting story of Sam Houston, a war hero, a president, a senator, a governor, a Unionist, an anti-expansion of slavery, and eventually he would retire to Huntsville, Texas. But that's just by the passing of Sam Houston. Now, going back now to the Constitution. A couple of things. The governor has now been reduced to 2 years. Remember, we started a 4-year governor, 3-year president, now it's 2-year governor. The legislative branch will not be meeting every year. Now the legislative branch will be meeting once every 2 years, right? They've further been reduced in the ability to control government, right? You got to understand that, again, as we said, Texas is very conservative. And so part of the conservative nature is to have a smaller, limited, controlled legislative branch that is a citizens' legislature rather than a professional legislature, right? And so they meet once every 2 years. So that happens in this Constitution. Right, a couple of things also happen. We see and this will change. We have one Supreme Court, district courts, and inferior courts. So we can also see the shaping of the Texas judiciary, which will cause chaos later on. And so basically, you started with the lower courts into the district courts, and then they went to the Supreme Court, right? But we'll see more complexity happening down the line. Of course, slavery continued, and in fact, the Texas legislature, according to the Constitution, was banned from passing any laws that would emancipate slaves. All right. Eventually, America will have greater challenges, and this is by 1860s. So by 1861, Texas will be part of the Confederacy. So this is a Civil War constitution. It is a military constitution in that Texas will secede from the Union together with the South, and therefore it's one party. It's the Democratic Party. It's the Confederacy. It's a one-party system, and allegiance, as we saw with Sam Houston's ouster, is paramount. Right? Eventually, we know what will happen is the South would lose this conflict, right? And eventually, we would go to the 1866 post-Civil War Constitution. The 1866 Constitution was supposed to send Texas back to the fundamental principles of the 1845 Constitution, of course, without slavery, which was now illegal, and without some forms of discrimination, according to the post-Civil War amendments. If you can remember, the 13th Amendment ending slavery, 14th Amendment declaring that all people must be treated equal under the same law, right? So we have that, and then under the due process of the law. And then the 15th Amendment allowed for voting or suffrage rights for all men. And so allowing for all of that, the 1866 Constitution was supposed to take Texas back to the 1845 principles. But something soon happens. And now we are in the radical Constitution of 69. The radical Constitution of 69. Right? Now I don't know if I'm running out of the board. Let me come this way. '69 Constitution. This is the radical Constitution. Okay? Now, in the radical Constitution, a couple of things happen. One, the Republicans, remember at this point, the parties were switched. The Republicans are quite annoyed with the South, which was Democratic at the time. And therefore, they want to put really martial law. They want to really teach the South a lesson about the seceding from the United States. Number two, Lincoln is assassinated, so grievances arise. And so the Republicans take over, and they use the Union Army, right? And they're going to enforce changes, as we know with Juneteenth, where the Union Army marched down to Texas and forced the end of slavery, right? And so all these things are going to happen. And so the Republicans are going to take over. They're going to keep a lot of the Confederate leaders and officers away from power, and they're really going to move the country in a different direction. Now, a couple of challenges happen. Remember, Texas has been moving towards more conservative government over time, right? Whether it's limiting the powers of the governor, limiting the powers of the legislative branch, and really controlling how even judges are put into office. However, the radical Republicans come in and they want to move the southern states to model the United States government, which is a little bit more, if we can say, liberal than the Texas conservative constitution, right? So it did not align with prior Texas principles, right? It limited, of course, the Confederate leaders, soldiers, and people of high position from participating in the process. Now, the governor now is moved from a 2-year to a 4-year term, right? And so that increases his power of the governor, and he can also now appoint, he appoints a lot of the members of now, just to mention, Texas was moving towards plural executive. We'll talk about that. But now we see that the governor has a lot of appointing powers from members of the executive branch all the way to members of the judiciary, right? The legislative branch now meets annually, not once every 2 years, but once a year. So we see an increase in the powers of the members of the legislative branch. And for example, senators moved from 4-year terms to 6-year terms. So it very much mirrored what we'll expect with the federal government, right? In the powers of the governor, mirroring the powers of the president, the ears of the members of the legislative branch mirroring that of the American government. And so in that regard, that's what they're trying to do. But again, remember, this is very much more liberal considering Texas's the process in which Texas was taking, right? And so we see a lot of changes. Number two, citizenship and enfranchisement. African-American communities and other minority communities are now enjoying political rights and freedoms and protections unlike ever before across the South. And so part of that meant the Union Army was present. And so there was protection against aggression. Public programs became popular. Before this, again, Texas did not so much prefer public programs like public schools and public funding and high debt accumulation by the government. All this are acceptable by the radical Republicans. So these are some of the things that would again lead to reactionary politics and grievances among the Texans, right? So all this becomes the headache of the South that now is being forced to change their ways, right? More power is centralized to the state government. Judges are appointed at higher volumes by the governor. And the governor would be E.J. Davis, a Republican, who fought with the Union. So E.J. Davis, on one hand, there's greater protections for minorities. There's greater enfranchisement of groups that were suppressed. And on the other hand, though, unfortunately, his tenure was marked with a high level of corruption. Political opponents were suppressed, and members of the press were suppressed by the military or by policing powers, right? And the further expansion of executive powers further alienated the Texans. And so, over time, the powers of the radical Republicans in Washington, D.C. would wane, right? Their powers will wane, and the Washington will no longer want to really control the South with a strong hand as it did before. Eventually, the Democrats will be back in power. And this will be the election of 1873. In 1873, Richard Cook, a Democrat, is elected president. And of course, E.J. Davis wants to contest, and he has a military behind him, and he was going to push back against this election. But Ulysses Grant, who was the president at the time, refused to really back E.J. Davis towards this endeavor. E.J. Davis will accept defeat. Richard Cook would become the governor, a Democratic governor. So, of course, what would happen next? Immediately, a convention would be called September 1875. And the main theme of that convention, it's a constitutional convention, was to reform and retrench. In other words, we're going to use reactionary politics. We're going to go back to the fundamental Texan ways. And so that was their slogan: go back to the governing traditions of Texas, of limited government and a strong distrust on powerful centralized systems. So, our current constitution is the 1876 Constitution, right? It's still influenced by the U.S. Constitution, but it is very limited or limiting in the powers of members of the state government. Of course, with the current politics, we have seen the state government become more powerful over time vis-a-vis the local and county governments, unlike what the founding fathers of Texas wanted, right? So they created a couple of things in this constitution. The terms of the governor are limited back to 2 years. So we move from 4 years back to 2 years, right? So copying the 1845 Constitution, right? So we see a lot of those, the legislative branch is to meet once every 2 years again, and only for 140 days. Right? Unless the governor calls a special session, which they will have only 30 days. Okay? So, the governor's appointing powers are further reduced. Plural executive is back. And so we have the lieutenant governor, the attorney general, the comptroller of accounts, the commissioner of agriculture, the commissioners of the general land office, amongst many other commissions who run independently for office. So these people are not appointed by the governor, they're not beholden to the governor, they're beholden directly to the Texan public, which elects them directly, right? Which greatly weakens the powers of the governor. Another thing we see with the Constitution is eventually Texans will begin to treat their Constitution as an almost legislative, almost county rules and law document. Continuous inputs of so many ideas on an annual basis, some conflicting with each other, leading to what is called deadwood, which is parts of the Constitution that are no longer workable, right, or feasible. And so we have a plural executive. Some people say it's too fragmented. It's hard to follow and know who do you go after? Because all these people are independent, and so it can be hard. Number two, you are voting for a lot of people. Another issue is interest groups. Because there are so many independent running officials from the judiciary, from the executive branch, from the legislative branch, interest groups could better be able to target these members by giving them money directly. And so in that way, interest groups can have greater control of Texas because of this. And so these are some of the challenges and changes that happened as a consequence of the 1876 Constitution. So you have a very rigid constitution, over 100,000 words, 2 times longer or 2.5 times longer than the average constitution in the United States of America. And so that is the history of the Texas Constitution. We have seen from the time of Mexico all the way through becoming an independent republic, to becoming a 28th state in 45, to the Confederacy in 61, to the post-Civil War 66, to the radical Reconstruction Constitution of 69, and then finally to the current Constitution. And what we have seen is there's been reactionary history. Continuously, Texas has reacted to what has happened and made changes towards that endeavor, changes that move it more to the right of U.S. politics, right? We have a conservative nature, and that conservative nature started from the very beginning. We want to limit the executive branch, the judiciary, and the legislative branch, and this started from the very onset, all right? And while the radical Republicans tried to push Texas more closer to the United States, Texas bounced back in a reactionary form to its governing principles, really mirroring the 45 constitutions, i.e. while still understanding the supremacy clause had changed a lot of things in the post-Civil War. So that is the Texas constitutional history.